I'm 83 years old, and if you're watching this right now, wondering what this old man you've never met could possibly have to say to you, well, that's exactly why I sat down in front of this camera today. My name is Harold, and I want to talk about what I finally let go of. Not all at once, not easily, but I let it go. I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio. My father worked at a steel mill. My mother taught third grade at the local elementary school. We didn't have much, but the house was always full of warmth, not from money, but from the fact that the people in it were alive, talking, arguing, laughing. I grew up believing that the world was a place where you had to earn your right to exist, that people only respected you when you proved something. My father lived that way. His father lived that way. And I lived that way. For decades, never once questioning whether it was true. I spent over 30 years working in construction. Started as a laborer, worked my way up to foreman, then project superintendent. Not a glamorous career by anyone's measure, but I was proud of it. Every apartment building, every school, every overpass, I put something of myself into each one. My hands, my time, my attention. I thought that was the meaning of it all. To leave something standing behind you, something you could touch with your hands. My wife Dorothy was with me for 47 years. She passed 5 years ago, quietly, in her sleep. The doctor said her heart gave out. I've always thought she simply decided she'd done everything she came here to do, and it was time to go. She was exactly that kind of person. She finished everything she started. After she was gone, I spent nearly a year in a state I can't quite find words for. I didn't cry much. I just emptied out. I walked through the house, made coffee, looked out the window, thought about everything and nothing in particular. And somewhere in that quiet, almost hollow year, something began to shift in me. I started looking back over my life, not with regret exactly, but with a strange kind of clarity, like a fog had lifted, and I saw it very clearly. How much of myself I had spent on things that never mattered at all. The first thing I stopped caring about was what other people thought of me. I spent most of my life with a constant low hum of noise in my head. What will the neighbors say? How does this look? What will my boss think? What will my brother-in-law make of this? That noise was so familiar, I barely noticed it anymore. It was just there, like a fan running in the corner of a room. You get used to it and stop hearing it, but it was draining me. Every single day, quietly, bit by bit. I remember one specific moment. I was somewhere around 50. Dorothy and I were shopping for a new sofa. The old one had finally given out. I found one I liked, comfortable, well-built. We both liked it. But it was bright green, and I didn't buy it. Not because it wasn't right for us, but because I thought, what are people going to say when they come over? We bought a beige one instead. Ordinary, safe, correct. Dorothy didn't say anything at the time, but years later, near the end, she brought up that green sofa and smiled. You know, that was a nice couch. And I realized we'd both wanted it. But I had chosen the opinion of future house guests over our own genuine preference. A small thing. But I accumulated a warehouse full of small things like that over a lifetime. Now, at 83, I genuinely don't care what anyone thinks about my jacket, my truck, where I take my vacations, or how much I have in my savings account. Not because I've become cold or withdrawn, but because I finally understood something simple. Most people are too busy with their own lives to think about you nearly as much as you imagine. That realization gave me more freedom than I know what to do with, and I still can't quite believe I lived so long without it. The second thing I stopped caring about was the need to be right. I was a stubborn man. Dorothy knew that better than anyone. I could carry a grudge for weeks over some argument, not because I was truly hurt, but because I couldn't bring myself to back down. Couldn't admit that maybe I was wrong, that the other person had a point, that my view of things was incomplete. There's a moment in any close relationship where you face a choice. You can be right, or you can preserve the connection. I chose the first option far too many times. I remember a falling out with my son. He was around 30, living his own life up in Portland, running a small business. We argued over a decision he'd made that I thought was a mistake. I said some sharp things. He said some sharp things back. And then we didn't speak for almost 8 months. 8 months of silence between a father and his son. Over what exactly? Over the fact that neither of us was willing to be the one who was wrong. He called first, not because he conceded I was right, but because he decided the relationship mattered more than the argument. And when I picked up the phone, I felt such a wave of relief that I was ashamed of myself. Ashamed of those 8 months we'd both just thrown away. These days, I almost never argue. Not because I have nothing to say, but because I no longer believe my version of reality is the only valid one. Every person looks at the world through their own particular glass, their own history, their own wounds, their own experience. What seems obvious to me might be completely invisible to someone else. Accepting that isn't weakness. It's probably the hardest form of wisdom I've ever had to learn. The third thing I stopped caring about was the fear of not looking successful enough. For our generation, it was practically hardwired. Success meant specific, measurable things: a house, a car, a good job, a standing in the community. You were always comparing yourself to the neighbor, the co-worker, your brother-in-law. And if someone else had more, you felt this quiet shame, like you hadn't worked hard enough, like you were somehow less. I spent an enormous amount of internal energy on that comparison over the years, more than I can calculate. When I was around 60, a colleague at work bought a new truck. Expensive, shining, the kind you notice. I could have taken out a loan and bought something similar, and I seriously thought about it, not because I needed a new truck, but because I wanted to feel like I wasn't falling behind. Dorothy asked me quietly, "Harold, why do we need that?" And I couldn't answer her honestly, because the honest answer would have been, so I don't feel like less of a man standing next to Gary. I didn't buy the truck, but that moment showed me how deep that reflex ran. These days I live in the same house Dorothy and I shared. It's not large. The furniture isn't new, but there's memory in every corner of it, and that means more to me than any renovation ever could. I feel no shame about not having a lake house or the latest phone. What I feel is a quiet ease that comes from not having to prove anything to anyone. The fourth thing I stopped caring about was the illusion that I could control the things that mattered most. This was probably the most painful thing to understand. I've always been a planner, an organizer, someone who thinks 3 steps ahead and doesn't like surprises. That quality served me well at work. I kept every thread in my hands, anticipated problems, stayed prepared. And I carried that habit straight into my personal life. I wanted to control my health and Dorothy's health. I wanted to guide my children's choices and their paths. I wanted to be ready for anything. But Dorothy got sick suddenly. No warning signs, no chance to prepare. And sitting beside her in that hospital, holding her hand, trying to understand how I'd done everything right and still couldn't protect the most important person in my life, I felt something break apart in me. The illusion that control protects you from loss. It doesn't. It never did. To live is to accept uncertainty, to do what you can and then release your grip. Not with the resignation of a defeated person, but with the understanding of someone who has finally grasped. There are forces larger than your will, and fighting that is spending yourself on a battle you were never going to win. These days I plan very little. I do what I can today. I don't avoid thinking about the future, but I don't let it steal the present from me. It's a simple formula. It just took me over 7 decades to start actually living by it. The 5th thing I stopped caring about was postponing enjoyment of small things. Dorothy and I loved pie. Her mother made the best blackberry pie you've ever tasted. Deep, dark, the kind that stains your fingers. We always saved the last one for later, for a special occasion, for company, for a holiday. Until one afternoon, Dorothy just cut into the last one on a regular Tuesday, no occasion whatsoever. I looked at her, surprised. She said, "Harold, when exactly is the special occasion going to come?" "Right now is the special occasion. We're alive, we're together, and there's pie." I never fully learned what she was teaching me in that moment. But after she was gone, I started noticing those moments she'd been pointing at my whole life. A morning with coffee on the porch when the air smells like spring. A phone call with my grandson when he laughs at something I don't quite understand. An old song on the radio we used to dance to in the kitchen. These things were always there. I just never let myself stop inside them. Now I stop, on purpose, with gratitude, not because I've gone soft in my old age, but because I understand the value of those moments in a way I simply couldn't before. The 6th thing I stopped caring about was expecting my children to live the life I hadn't finished living myself. This is a hard one to talk about honestly, but I want to. I have 3 children. My oldest, Robert, went into engineering, which is what I'd always hoped for. My middle daughter, Susan, married young, settled in a small town in Indiana, and built her life around her family. My youngest, Kevin, moved out to California over 10 years ago and built something completely his own out there. I worried about each of them for years, but for different reasons. Robert hadn't achieved enough by my measure. Susan had buried herself in domesticity. Kevin had wandered too far from where he came from. These were my words, my judgments, my expectations. None of them had asked me to evaluate their lives. They were just living, the best they knew how, the way they wanted to, the way things worked out. And my role was never supposed to be judge. It was supposed to be present. But for too long I confused fatherly love with fatherly control. The turning point came when Kevin flew home for Dorothy's funeral. We sat up late in the kitchen, drinking coffee, and he said to me quietly, "Dad, I know you never really approved of the choices I made, but the thing Mom always cared about most was whether I was happy. Maybe that could start to matter more to you now, too." He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it with love, and it landed exactly where it needed to. I let my children be who they are. Not overnight, not perfectly, but I started. And my relationship with all three of them has been warmer in the last few years than it had been in the previous 20. The seventh thing I stopped caring about was the fear of silence. My entire adult life I filled space, with work, with worry, with noise. If things got quiet, I found something to do. Silence felt like emptiness to me, and emptiness felt like a threat. But after Dorothy was gone, the silence didn't leave. It just became permanent, and I either learned to live inside it or I didn't live at all. It turned out the silence wasn't empty, it was full of thoughts, memories, the feeling of simply being myself. When you stop drowning it out with constant motion, you start to hear yourself. That's not always comfortable, but it's real. I sit in the mornings now, drink my coffee, look out the window, and do nothing. I just exist. And there's a completeness to that, a sufficiency. I'm no longer afraid of what's inside the quiet. I've learned to be at home there. I won't pretend it's easy. 83 is not a light age. My body reminds me of that every day. There are days when the loneliness is real. There are days when the sadness comes. There are days when I look at a photograph of Dorothy and think about all the things I never got around to saying. But there is something in this age that I wouldn't trade for youth or for the health of a 20-year-old, and that's clarity. That feeling when the fog finally lifts and you can see, plainly and without any confusion, what actually matters and what was always just noise. What matters is the people you love. What matters is the moments when you're fully present. What matters is what you did out of love rather than out of fear or comparison. What matters is how you treated the people who had nothing to give you in return. Everything else, I stopped spending myself on it. Not because I got tired, but because I finally saw the price. If you're younger than me, and I imagine most of the people watching this are, I'm not asking you to change everything right now. I'm not giving you a lecture. I'm just telling you what I can see from where I'm standing, here at 83. You might be in the middle of all of it right now. The comparisons, the expectations, the arguments, the control, the postponed pleasures. And that's fine. That's where most of life happens. But somewhere inside you, you already know what actually matters. You can already feel the difference between what feeds you and what drains you. Listen to that feeling. Not tomorrow, now. You don't need to wait until you're 83 to stop living for other people's eyes. You don't need to lose the person you love most to understand the value of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with coffee and pie. You don't need 8 months of silence with your son to decide that the relationship matters more than being right. I learned these things late. But better late than never isn't just a saying, it's actually true. I'm sitting here in front of you, in my ordinary house, in my ordinary shirt, and I am free. Not because I have a great deal, but because I finally put down what was never mine to carry. And that is the lightest I have ever felt. Thank you for listening.